Hello, folks. Welcome to our lovely Thrive Forum. It's our chance to talk to you about our nutrition framework. So I'm going to try and spend the next 20 minutes or so going through this very brief PowerPoint. And I think it's quite a big topic, but I've tried my best to condense it down. I've got four principles to go over. We're going to calculate some macros. So we're going to look at what sort of options we've got for trying to come up with some mathematical equation for what we should be eating. Then we're going to adjust that, and I'll teach you some different ways to consider the different activities that you do and how that's all going to piece together. We're going to talk about different ways of practicing frameworks, okay, and just making sure that you do see it as a practice. It takes time. We have to do it time and time again. And to that point, we've got to go through some iterations. So let's see what's on the next slide. Okay, so over here, what we've got is we're talking about how to calculate our calories, okay? And for calculating your calories, I was taught to use the Harris-Benedict equation, okay? That is this rather complicated equation down here. What a first slide. I promise you the rest are just a bit more abstract and a bit more me talking. The point being, it takes into multiple factors. So your age, your height, and your weight, and it runs it through some sort of estimate of what calories you should be doing. You can plug that in anywhere. That's typically how that will come out. What's important is that this brings us to your basal metabolic rate, your BMR. That is the amount of calories you need to essentially exist in a coma, I suppose, is one way to think about it. So we need to think about what we're going to do in real life with that number. Okay, so what do? Use this coefficient multiplier based on your lifestyle and your goal. Okay, so do this on all the calls and sort of have a little ask, what sort of activity range do you have? Okay, so you could have no activity. Again, nobody really fits into that. As you slide up the scale, we have light activity. So that's usually a bit of moving around, some sort of gym work, but nothing particularly intense. Moderate training, we're talking more sort of 3 to 5 times a week, much more intense, much more recovery going on. And heavy training, we multiply those calories even more. So what's important about this is that there is a range of calories right out the gate, just based on your daily life. We've got the, at one end, the postman who trains twice a day MMA. That's a lot of calories needed. And then we've got, very much bedbound, sedentary person, no activity. Okay, so we have to really consider between these two things once we've done the maths. Okay, it does depend on your lifestyle and your goal. So that's something I want to talk about, is your goal percentage differences. Historically, you might have seen some different numbers for fat loss just based on how many calories are in a pound of fat. It's kind of a bit better to think about a percentage. So we're going to negate 10% for some moderate fat loss, or we're going to trial out 20% reduction in calories for accelerated fat loss. Wouldn't really suggest you go any lower than that. And that's going to be important when you think about what numbers you end up with. Okay, so let me just reframe all of that so we get the big picture. Anyone who comes to me, we just get an idea of their calories. So plug in their numbers for Molly. She's 64, she's 5'5", and she's 75. Molly is fictional. I'll talk all about her and she'll take on different personas as we go. But the point being, for Molly to exist in a vacuum, 1,300 calories, 1,300 calories, okay? We do need to kind of know that number, or at least start off with that number. It's a really good place to start. Ultimately, this is a measurement and an estimate, okay? I'm going to multiply it by 1.3. That's what I do for most people. And to some extent, for myself, like unless I'm really training that much more, I tend to just use the lower numbers because you can always add calories. That's nice and easy. Taking away calories is a little bit harder from a framework. You have to do a bit more work. Point being, that takes us to close to 1700, so 1700, okay? And then we're going to take away 10% so that Molly can lose a little bit of this extra weight that she's carrying for her height and her age. And it's going to take her to 1500 calories. In my experience, a lot of people with some element of carrying a bit of extra weight, they tend to not be eating this regularly, and then they overeat at the weekends. So that's really important. You can factor that in, but it's kind of easier if you're just really consistent, okay? And then we've got to think about where those calories have come from. Okay, so biscuits and sweets could probably do better. Maybe some protein and some good fats might be on the way there. Throughout this, I'll be using protein grams per day. So we're trying to calculate some sort of allowance or suggested amount. I've got a generous 1 gram per pound of body weight. There's lots of different calculations for that. And so this is why just down here, I wanted to include this little quote. This is from Peter Attia's sort of work, and you know, lots of people use this number. It's not just him. The point being is that he goes for 0.7 to 1 gram per pound daily. So for young Molly here, 75 kilos, we can kind of times that by 2 or 2.2 if you want it to be really exact. 150 grams of protein. That's that's a little bit extra than Molly needs, okay? But the point is that's kind of like an upper range. So we can think about that. Okay, and then fats per day. I like people to make sure they're having, particularly a female like Molly, 60 grams of fat per day. I've talked to a lot of folks over the past summer who are eating 20 to 40 grams a day and then just not really paying attention to where all the other calories come from. And kind of what makes this tricky is that I don't think most people will feel that good if they restrict fats too much, particularly females as well. Okay. And just so that you don't think I've just made that number up, it's sort of a diversion of the government guideline, which is 70 grams of total fat per day for an average woman eating a 2,000 calorie diet. So just as a percentage, if we're going for 1,500 calories, we can drop off a bit from the 70. We might end up closer to 50, but the point is there's a goal, there's an endpoint that we're trying to hit to. And then I added my carbohydrates, so the remaining calories are from there. So boring slide, hopefully done. The point is you've got a little bit of maths to set you off. Next up, we need to adjust those calories. Okay, so what I ask people to do is write out a normal day's eating. So here's what Molly might eat. At 7 o'clock in the morning, she'll have toast and jam. It's about 300 calories, okay? When we have a conversation about protein, we find out how little protein that meal has. It's not very good for you, okay? At least in the context of trying to eat enough protein. At 12 o'clock, falafel wrap, okay. We've got some nice bit of calories there to kind of set us up for the day. But we are still a little skimpy on